Dude, what are you doing? Start the video. Hey, start the video.
All right. Just give me one more second.
Dude.
No one likes to be told what to do. I certainly don't. We like to be free to live how we want. But sometimes in our stubbornness to do things our way, to strike out on our own, we can get a little consumed. And then somewhere along the way, when the things that we set out to dominate start to dominate us, that's when it becomes clear that we weren't as free as we thought.
This video was due yesterday.
In the same way, Vinland Saga tackles this very notion of being free.
金の奴隷が無知持って金で買った奴隷に囚人面してやがんな。
What I find great about its second season is that it functions as an inverse to its first season. If season 1 was an illustration of the powerful, season 2 is like an illustration of the powerless, which is a vital component in the picture that season 1, also known as the war arc, was trying to paint. Because as we're shown, war and slaves go hand in hand. And the brilliant way this season bridges this gap is by reintroducing us to Thorfinn, who has now been brought down to the level of his victims, in order to make him face the type of people he's hurt or contributed to hurting. Good, kind people that have only been taken from, but still wake him up when he's having nightmares. Season 2 makes it a priority to not only put us in the shoes of its victims, but to make us experience their anguish. And the way it does this is by directly challenging the relationship between power and freedom. Those with power have more freedom, obviously, but that could also just be on the outside, because power over others doesn't always equal power over yourself. We have tons of characters that have been shown to us since season 1 that seem like they're free, but they're just as trapped as the slaves they oppress. Thorkel was a slave to battle, Bjorn was a slave to his bloodlust, Canute was a slave to his need to be loved, King Sweyn was a slave to his crown, and Askeladd was a slave to his pride and his past, which was fueled by his hatred for the Danes. Because that's the irony that Vinland Saga presents. Characters that think they're above others without realizing they're just as trapped as them. And this season continues that exploration, but in a different type of setting, where thrilling action is replaced with tough decisions. The battles are still there, but they're more internal. Before we were seeing war being waged for the sake of the spoils. Here on the farm, we're seeing war being waged for the sake of the soul. These decisions that they have to make characterize the people that they are and the people that they're going to be. The slaves are good people that aren't allowed the right to make decisions. They have no rights. And those that do have power to make decisions on the farm are men that have been rejected by the outside world. For example, let's take a look at the retainers. The retainers, led by Snake, are chained down to their past and ruined reputation, which keeps them from being able to do anything else or become anyone else. They're stuck. Kettle, actually, right before this, quick disclaimer, I don't know how to pronounce these names. I'm gonna base it off of I'm half basing it on the Japanese pronunciations and half basing it on what I think it would sound like in English. So Kettle, the master of the farm, is chained down not by his cowardice, but by his image that he's built up in order to compensate for that cowardice, because he knows he can't be accepted into this Norse society of men that are warriors.
孫遊の襲撃、略奪は我らノルド人の伝統でしょう。恐ろしい。わしの息子とは到底思えん。
This is why he easily caves into pressure from others when he's made to punish children for stealing. He even increases the amount of strikes to hit them with so he doesn't seem weak. He is so obsessed with preserving this image because it's his lifeline. His son Olmar is an idiot that's not skilled enough or brave enough to handle the battlefield, but society keeps him feeling like he needs to assert his dominance, which only makes him come off brash and foolish. And then there's Patter, who's well-adjusted and kind, but as a former slave that is mainly only good at farming, he doesn't have much else he can do besides continue to work on Kettle's farm. They're all either slaves, cowards, or men who have nowhere else they can go. The world is full of battle, and the farm is the only place for them that's removed from it. This is why they're bound to it. And then in the midst of all of this is, I don't know how I'm going to pronounce this in English, Arnheid? I'm going to Google this. How to pronounce?
Arnheid.
And in the midst of all of this is Arnheid, whose gut-wrenching story emphasizes how in a society dominated by men, women like her have the least choice. Ultimately, the choice that brought misfortune and suffering to both her family and her village was her husband's. She didn't have a say in his decision to use violence, which led to more violence and eventually their deaths. Only the men in this world have the power to make a change in the culture, but not many have been shown to have the resolve to do it. As we've seen so far in Vinland Saga, there are only a few who have had their eyes open to the deeper truths of the world. Those are the only ones that are able to break free from the chains that bind them and also the chains of the cycle of violence. Last season, the only two people that are able to awaken to this truth are Thors and Canute. Thors is said to have been a true warrior, and Canute is said to bear the same look in his eyes as Thors after he makes this mental shift. What Thors finds is the senselessness of violence after he figures out that he wants to protect his family. What Canute finds is much bigger, and that's the meaning of God's love. God's love was like a vague term being thrown around in the background by the priest who was accompanying them, and it isn't until Ragnar dies that we get the full extent of its meaning. As Canute realizes that the last person in this world to have loved him is dead, the priest points out that it wasn't really love that he had for him, but discrimination. Ragnar was able to tolerate the slaughter of 62 innocent people by Askeladd and his merry band of murderers in order to keep Canute alive. This is when it becomes clear that to demonstrate God's love is to show equal love for your fellow man, regardless of their relationship to you or even their status. And this is the point that Canute has an epiphany that God's love has always been present in all of the beauty of his creation, and the act of giving back to it is a repayment of that. Unfortunately, that love is absent in the hearts of men because the Vikings' motivations are rooted in self-interest. And instead of appreciating the beauty that's inherent in the world, all they're doing is defiling it. This is what gives Canute clarity about the state of the world. One example of this is Sverkel, who's only on this farm. I don't know if I pronounced his name right. Sverkel? Sverkel. One example of this is Ketil's father, Sverkel, who's the only person on this farm that stands at odds with its chain of command and is probably the best example of a hardworking man that lives an honest life by giving back to the earth and the people around him. He's different from the rest. He might seem crabby on the outside, but he never throws his weight around, and he gives everyone a fair shot regardless of their status. Even though he has this wisdom, what he lacks is the power to make any substantial change in the culture around him because he lived his life too passively by waiting out the storm. And now he's grown too old. He didn't use what he had while he had it because clarity alone doesn't cut it. By juxtaposing these different worldviews, Vinland Saga suggests that the struggle to be free isn't just about clarity, but about sticking to your convictions in the face of external pressures. And in a culture that glorifies and rewards violence both in life and in death, doing anything that goes against that may seem like an insurmountable task. The easier path is obviously the path of least resistance, to become like the Vikings, just as Thorfinn once did, just as Askeladd did. Everything laid out in season 1 paved the way for this eventual shift in perspective because if you think about it, violence was framed in a way to make it seem excessive and meaningless. In Askeladd's words, they had no appreciation of beauty. There's much more to live for, but they couldn't see it. While Canute does end up gaining clarity about the world, Thorfinn sinks further until he breaks, because that's what he needed to happen in order to regain control of his life. The farm is important for Thorfinn to experience because for his entire life, he's been surrounded by a constant barrage of violence and turmoil, which only fueled the turmoil within himself. Being constantly manipulated by Askeladd, he was practically already a slave. But on the farm, he at least gets to experience a more tranquil side of life, as well as small gestures of kindness. By being able to cultivate things with his own two hands and experience the joy of creation, he's able to find something more to living. Through his friendship with Einar, he's able to interact with another person in a way that doesn't involve violence or aggression. Not only seeing but experiencing the goodness in other people and what it brings to his life is able to gradually bring Thorfinn's humanity back until he's the level-headed one trying to keep Einar from giving into his rage like he used to do. And then in the moment that he gives into his own rage once again, he's in a better place to confront his past and embark on a path of atonement. And this is when we get the visual of Thors finally being able to move forward because now Thorfinn is officially following in his footsteps onto his true battle. The farm, in a way, is like a blessing for him. But as he begins to ponder about a purpose for his life, a way that he can give back for all that he's been given, he gets to see, for others, the farm is like a curse. It's through Arnheid's story that Thorfinn's newfound resolve is tested. Not only does he have to make the difficult choice of helping her at the risk of breaking his vow, he's faced with the reality that violence can exist anywhere, even in the most seemingly peaceful of men. Before, he had committed to the idea of giving back as part of his atonement, but now with Arnheid's death, This forces Thorfinn to make a stand. Because with Arnhein's death, it's no longer just about himself and his atonement. It's now his life's mission to find a better way so people like her won't have to continue to suffer. Standing up to Canute and his forces is the ultimate test of Thorfinn's resolve, because if not, they're just pretty words. The hardest part is the implementation, because to make a true transformation, you have to commit to your new worldview. And the only person on the farm with enough power on the slave side to make that type of decision is Thorfinn.
おかしいか。トルフィンは俺の認めた戦士だ。
And that's why his restraint to fight back speaks so loudly. This gives his words so much weight. Vikings who are all about their pride and fighting, Thorfinn throws all of that shit away for something more noble. In the end, even Olmar summons the strength to commit to kindness over violence, to stick to his beliefs even in the face of everyone else who disagrees, which is something his father could never even do. And to break free from external pressure and stick to what he internally values is what ends up speaking to his actual character. What hits the strongest about Vinland Saga is its commitment to taking the lesser known road. Exploring this idea of non-violence in an era rampant with violence is no easy feat. It creates moments for our characters of doubt and tough decisions because there are no right answers, especially in what they're trying to do. It pits their determination to make a change in the world against the logical impossibility of trying such an approach. It's constantly challenging itself to find a better answer by presenting us with counterpoints, such as the problem with being too pacifistic as we see in Sverkel's story, or how we're even made to briefly consider Snake's reasoning for doing what he's doing when Thorfinn is debating whether it's justified for him to even fight him. This creates such a push and pull where the show tries to wrestle with different answers, even challenging the viewer to think of other ways themselves. Just when you think the characters might be on the right path, a wrench is thrown in, and that's the true battle. This, in combination with the main character's belief in his own redemption, is truly what makes you want to invest in this unclear path. Because it's hard enough already to even fathom how he'll be successful in applying it consistently. But his transformation makes you want to follow his journey regardless, because you see a character who went from not caring for anything or anyone else aside from his revenge to someone who begins to recognize the value of life and genuinely wants to contribute back to it in order to create a better world. And that's just such a game changer. And pairing it with Canute's path helps create a strong parallel between them that will only help to keep examining and challenging the faults of either of their approaches. And who knows, the story may not end up having any solution to these real-world problems, but right now that's secondary to what Vinland Saga managed to capture so well for me in this season. And that's that freedom starts.
The thing with beauty is that you just can't hold on to it. You can't force it. For a long time, I thought freedom was about getting to do what you want, but it's not even about that. Especially when the things that you want start weighing you down. When it makes you do things that not only bring down the people around you, but disfigures your soul in the process of trying to get it. To the point that you no longer start recognizing yourself. Being free is letting life around you grow freely and letting yourself have the opportunity to do the same. Sometimes the best things are the things we weren't even looking for. We're just here to witness the beauty that comes into our lives. But when it's ready to go, all we can do, and all we should do, is just let it go, because that's its right. And the way to do that is not just with a profound realization. True freedom can only come from having a firm foundation, one that you've carved for yourself, one that's carved from your convictions, so that you can solidly plant your feet on it, and when necessary, you can stand up for it.